After an absolutely shocking and, let's be honest, gut punch of a loss to Novak Djokovic in the Australian Open quarterfinals, Carlos Alcaraz found himself smack dab in the middle of a firestorm he probably never saw coming. The young Spanish tennis sensation, who had been skyrocketing through the ranks faster than you can say Grand Slam, wasn't shy about spilling the tea in his post-match interviews or on social media. Nope, he skipped the usual polite cliches and went straight for the jugular with some sharp-ass comments aimed squarely at Djokovic. Forget dissecting the game itself. Carlos was more interested in calling out Novak's alleged shady behavior, setting off a full-blown media circus that spiraled out of control faster than you could refresh Twitter. In the press conference right after the match, Alcaraz dropped the kind of soundbite that sports journalists live for. "There's a difference between being competitive and just being plain shady," he snapped, his tone as sharp as a backhand slice. While he didn't elaborate, the implication was clear as day. Novak Djokovic was pulling some next-level, behind-the-scenes BS. Naturally, this vague but loaded statement had reporters, fans, and even fellow players speculating like crazy. Was he talking about Novak's infamous on-court mind games? Or was there some deeper ATP drama brewing backstage? Nobody knew for sure, but one thing was certain: Alcaraz wasn't holding back. And just when you thought things couldn't get spicier, Carlos took his beef to Instagram. In a series of posts that screamed subtweet energy, he absolutely roasted Novak's public persona. "Respect for the game starts with respecting your peers," one post read, alongside a picture of Alcaraz signing autographs for adoring fans. Another post, even more cryptic, declared, "Some champions build legacies with their rackets. Others rely on politics." Boom. Mic drop. The tennis world exploded into debates and memes, with fans choosing sides like it was a Game of Thrones finale. But wait, there's more. A few days later, Alcaraz strolled into a Spanish sports talk show like he owned the place and doubled down on his comments. "I'm not sugarcoating anything," he said, leaning forward in his chair like he was about to spill the juiciest gossip of the year. "Tennis should be about what happens on the court, but with certain people, it feels like a whole different game is being played behind the scenes." He paused dramatically, letting the tension build. When pressed for specifics, Carlos hesitated for just a beat before dropping another bombshell. "Let's just say there are privileges some players seem to enjoy, things that make you question whether the playing field is actually level. It's not just about skill or experience. It's about influence." Cue the gasps. The young Spaniard wasn't just taking shots at Novak. He was calling out the entire system, accusing the sport of bending over backward for its established stars while leaving rising players like himself in the dust. Naturally, this didn't sit well with Team Djokovic. They fired back with a statement dismissing Carlos's comments as misguided and disappointing. Meanwhile, some of Carlos's peers, especially the younger ones, rallied to his defense. "Carlos is saying what a lot of us are too scared to admit," an anonymous player confessed to a sports journalist. "There's this feeling that certain players can get away with stuff the rest of us can't. It's maddening." Of course, the controversy also reignited long-standing debates about Novak Djokovic's polarizing career. Critics dredged up every questionable moment in his history, from his vaccine stance to his occasionally fiery on-court antics. Meanwhile, his die-hard fans circled the wagons, praising his grit, resilience, and sheer dominance in the game. The conversation wasn't just about tennis anymore. It was about fairness, legacy, and what it really takes to be a champion in a sport often criticized for its rigid hierarchies. As the weeks dragged on, the drama refused to die down. Sports analysts dissected every word Carlos had said, every gesture he'd made, and every past interaction between him and Novak. Was Carlos being a brave truth-teller or an immature hothead? Opinions were split, but one thing was undeniable. The kid had hit a nerve. And Carlos? He couldn't have cared less about the backlash. In later interviews, he stuck to his guns, emphasizing his belief in fairness and transparency in the sport. "I'm not here to make friends," he quipped with a sly grin. "I'm here to shake things up." And shake things up he did, proving that sometimes the biggest battles in tennis aren't fought with a racket, but with a mic and a social media account. "I'm not here to make friends," Carlos Alcaraz fired off during a press conference at one of the smaller tournaments in the season, his tone dripping with a mix of defiance and impatience. "I'm here to play tennis and stand up for what I believe is right. If that means pissing a few people off, so be it." The room, filled with reporters expecting the usual bland tennis platitudes, buzzed with the energy of someone who clearly wasn't holding back. Behind closed doors, sources close to Alcaraz whispered that his frustration wasn't just about Novak Djokovic. Sure, the simmering beef between them was obvious, but Carlos's irritation ran deeper, rooted in the systemic bullshit woven into professional tennis. Rumors swirled about preferential treatment for the sport's elite, top players enjoying cherry-picked schedules, questionable leniency in rule enforcement, and perks that were out of reach for up-and-comers like Alcaraz. For a 20-something navigating the shark-infested waters of the tennis elite for the first time, these disparities were glaringly obvious, and frankly, they pissed him off. Meanwhile, Djokovic played it cool, or at least pretended to. He stayed eerily quiet on the whole thing, focusing instead on his matches and the next tournament. Some called it taking the high road, while others saw it as a sneaky strategy to avoid throwing fuel on the fire. Either way, his silence only seemed to add more gasoline to Carlos's fiery commentary. Far from backing down, Alcaraz leaned into the chaos, talking with a bluntness that felt equal parts refreshing and controversial. The drama took an unexpected twist when a former coach, one who had worked briefly with both players, decided to wade into the mess during an interview. "Carlos and Novak are more alike than they'd care to admit," the coach said with a laugh. "Both are ridiculously passionate, and just as ridiculously stubborn. This clash? It was inevitable." His comments added a layer of nuance to the saga, suggesting the tension wasn't just about their differences but also their frustrating similarities. As the tennis season rolled on, the feud began to overshadow the matches themselves. Fans showed up to tournaments with homemade signs referencing the drama, and social media was flooded with memes, GIFs, and arguments. It wasn't just a tennis rivalry anymore. It had morphed into a full-blown cultural moment, dragging larger issues of privilege, power, and the shifting dynamics of the sport into the spotlight. The chatter reached a fever pitch when Carlos, never one to mince words, dropped another truth bomb in a follow-up interview. "Let's call it what it is," he said, crossing his arms and leaning back with a smirk. "Some players get away with murder while the rest of us are out here fighting tooth and nail for every damn thing. It's not just about skill, it's about influence. And yeah, I think that's crap." Predictably, his comments sent shockwaves through the tennis world. Novak's camp fired back with a carefully worded statement dismissing Carlos's remarks as misguided and unfortunate. On the flip side, younger players, many of whom were grappling with similar frustrations, quietly cheered him on. "Carlos is saying what we've all been thinking," one anonymous player told a journalist. "The double standards are real, and they're maddening." Of course, Novak's fanbase wasn't having any of it. They pointed to his legendary career, his resilience, and his ability to bounce back from adversity, arguing that he'd earned every advantage through blood, sweat, and tears. Critics, however, gleefully dragged out his past controversies, everything from his vaccine drama to his sometimes fiery on-court antics, using them as ammunition to paint him as a player who always seemed to bend the rules without breaking them. As the dust slowly began to settle, the impact of the feud lingered. Analysts dissected every word, every gesture, and every historical interaction between the two players. Fans debated whether Carlos was a bold truth-teller or just an arrogant hothead. But love him or hate him, one thing was undeniable. Alcaraz had sparked a conversation that extended far beyond the tennis court. For Carlos, the controversy became a defining moment. It solidified his reputation as not just an incredible athlete but also a fearless advocate for change. Whether his sharp-tongued critiques would lead to any real reforms in the sport remained to be seen. But one thing was clear: Carlos Alcaraz wasn't just another rising star. He was a disruptor, a shit-stirrer, and a force to be reckoned with. And if the tennis world wasn't ready for him, well, tough luck. Tensions boiled over as players began to whisper what they'd kept bottled up for years. Only now, some of them were speaking those frustrations out loud, albeit carefully and off the record. Younger players, in particular, approached Carlos Alcaraz behind the scenes, giving him discreet high fives and muttering thanks for saying what they'd been too scared to voice. "This isn't just about Djokovic," one allegedly told him. "It's about a system that lets this kind of bullshit happen." But Alcaraz wasn't about to let Novak Djokovic off the hook. No, to him, Djokovic had become the perfect poster boy for everything wrong with tennis. In a raw interview with a Spanish newspaper, Alcaraz let it all out. "This isn't about jealousy or some petty rivalry," he said, his tone sharper than a well-angled forehand. "It's about principles. When certain players can break the rules, whether it's about scheduling, court assignments, or how umpires handle situations, it sends a clear message to the rest of us. We're not playing the same damn game. And that's not how it should be." Unsurprisingly, Djovic's fanbase lost their collective shit. Social media lit up with posts defending their golden boy. "Djokovic has earned his place," one fiery tweet declared. "If Carlos wants the same respect, maybe he should focus on his game instead of whining about things he clearly doesn't understand." The backlash was loud, fast, and brutal. But Carlos? He couldn't have cared less. He was too busy sharpening his game and growing more confident in his stance. During a live Q&A with fans, Carlos tackled some of the criticism head-on. "I get it," he admitted, shrugging with a sly grin. "It's easier to idolize someone than to question them. But I'm not here to play nice or pretend everything's perfect when it's not. My goal isn't to tear anyone down. It's to make the sport better for everyone." His candor only added fuel to the media firestorm, with analysts and commentators splitting into camps. Some praised him for his guts, likening him to other bold athletes who'd used their platforms to push for change. Others warned that his outspokenness could backfire, potentially alienating him from the sport's gatekeepers. "Tennis is a traditional game," one veteran commentator remarked on air. "Making waves like this might win Carlos some fans in the short term, but it could make his life a hell of a lot harder down the line." Despite the naysayers, Carlos found unexpected allies outside the tennis bubble. Prominent sports journalists and even retired athletes threw their support behind him. A former soccer star tweeted, "It takes guts to stand up to the system, especially when you're young and still carving out your place." Respect to Carlos for speaking his truth. Then came the showdown everyone was waiting for. The first time Carlos and Novak crossed paths after the drama erupted was at a charity event shortly after the Australian Open. Observers didn't miss a thing. Their handshake was icy as hell, so formal it might as well have been choreographed by lawyers. Throughout the night, Carlos kept his distance, his expression calm but unyielding. Novak, meanwhile, worked the room with his trademark smile, oozing charm like nothing had happened. But insiders weren't fooled. "There's definitely bad blood now," an anonymous ATP source revealed. Novak doesn't take kindly to being called out, especially by someone as young as Carlos. He's used to being respected, hell, practically worshipped, by his peers. This public challenge? It's new territory for him. Djokovic finally broke his silence in a carefully worded interview. Without naming Alcaraz, he spoke about the importance of respect and humility in sports. "We all have different paths to success," he said, his tone measured. "What matters is how we conduct ourselves along the way. I've always believed actions speak louder than words." While diplomatic on the surface, the statement was widely interpreted as a subtle jab at Carlos. Not to be left out, Carlos's coach, Juan Carlos Ferrero, weighed in during a press event. "Carlos is young and passionate," Ferrero said. "He speaks from the heart, and yeah, that can be polarizing. But wanting fairness isn't wrong. It's something we've all noticed at different points in our careers. Maybe Carlos is just the first one brave enough to say it out loud." As the drama continued to dominate headlines, sponsors and tournament organizers began to take notice. Carlos, already a rising star, found his marketability skyrocketing thanks to the controversy. Brands eager to align with his bold, unfiltered image started courting him with lucrative deals, painting him as a fearless disruptor unafraid to challenge the status quo. Meanwhile, Djovic's sponsorships held firm, with companies praising his professionalism and legacy. Behind closed doors, though, rumblings of unease began to emerge within the ATP. Officials were reportedly worried that the escalating animosity between the two players might damage the sport's reputation. Meetings were held to discuss possible interventions, but no formal action was announced. Tennis thrives on rivalries, an insider explained. But this feels different. It's less about the matches and more about what's happening off the court. That's a tricky line to walk. The tension spilled over into the stands, with fans picking sides in increasingly dramatic fashion. At high-profile tournaments, crowds were split, chanting and cheering with a fervor that mirrored the players' hostility. Signs declaring allegiance to either Alcaraz or Djokovic became a common sight, turning matches into arenas of loyalty and simmering hostility. Through it all, Carlos stood his ground. "I don't regret speaking out," he declared at yet another press conference. "If anything, I wish I'd done it sooner. Tennis is an incredible sport, but it's not perfect. And if we want it to grow, we have to be willing to have uncomfortable conversations. That's the only way things change." And change, whether the tennis world liked it or not, was coming.